He burst into the room and shouted, "You'll never guess who betrayed you." I froze. I looked at the evidence and realized it was someone I trusted the most. Now I know who's behind everything. But what I found out next was even more shocking. The silence in the room was deafening, the kind that fills the space between two people who once shared everything, but now can't even find the courage to look each other in the eye. It was Thanksgiving, a day meant for family, laughter, and the warmth of shared traditions. But for me, it felt like a cruel joke, one that I was a punchline to. My sister, Rachel, had always been the golden child, the one who never seemed to do anything wrong, the one who got the attention, the admiration, the love. And there I was at 38, standing in the corner of my parents' house, unnoticed, as if I didn't exist. My parents were too busy doting on Rachel, her endless doctor's appointments, her health issues that had defined our family for years. From the moment she was born, I had been pushed aside, made to feel like an inconvenience. Every time she sneezed, I was shipped off to Grandma Marie's house. Every time I succeeded, it was Rachel who was celebrated. I remember winning the science fair in middle school, my project on renewable energy, which should have been a huge moment for me. But instead of praise, I was met with silence. Rachel was sick again, and her flute recital had taken precedence. I had become used to it, the subtle disregard, the feeling that I was always second best. And yet I still tried. I joined clubs, I excelled academically, but it never seemed to matter. The more I achieved, the more I was ignored. Even when I scored a perfect 1600 on the SATs, the response was tepid. "That's nice, honey, but Rachel needs help with her English homework." My mother had said. I held those results in my hand, knowing they'd never even make it to the fridge. That was the life I had. It wasn't until high school that I started to find my voice. Debate team, National Honor Society, editor of the school newspaper. I threw myself into everything, all the while knowing that none of it would matter to my family. They were too consumed with Rachel. And when I finally got into Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, I had to keep it a secret, locking those acceptance letters away under my bed. I couldn't risk them overshadowing Rachel's latest health crisis. The final straw came when I received a full scholarship to Michigan, my golden ticket out. I had worked hard for it, and I was finally going to escape. But when I told my parents, they didn't even flinch. They were too busy worrying about Rachel and her cheerleading competitions. It hurt, but I had no choice but to go. I worked double shifts at Carson's Diner to save up for the move, and when I left, I promised myself I would build a life so incredible that no one, not even my family, would be able to ignore me. That night in the dorm room, as I sat alone, the weight of everything, the neglect, the betrayal, the constant struggle for validation, finally hit me. I wasn't just escaping Michigan. I was escaping my entire life. I was going to build something better, something that was all mine. But what happened next? I never expected. My first job after college seemed perfect, a promising start to my new life. But it was also the beginning of something far more complex. My past, my family, my sister Rachel, they weren't finished with me yet. The pieces I had carefully locked away were about to be torn open, and what I was going to uncover would shake me to my core. As much as I had tried to escape, the ghosts of my past were following me, and they were ready to make their presence known. The office smelled like fresh coffee and ambition, a combination that made me feel both hopeful and nauseous at the same time. It was the first day of my new job, a new chapter in my life that I had fought so hard to write. But even as I walked into the glass-walled building, my mind kept returning to the weight of the past. I should have felt proud, but all I could think about was how my family had never believed in me. It was as if I was starting all over again, but this time I wasn't sure I was ready to face what was coming. I settled into the role quickly, navigating office politics and learning the ropes. The first few weeks felt like a blur of deadlines, meetings, and small victories. The pay was decent. The colleagues were friendly, and the work was challenging in a way I hadn't expected. I had started to feel like I was building something that was mine, but the old habits died hard. My phone would buzz at the most inconvenient times, messages from my parents, my sister, Rachel, demanding my attention. They never asked how I was doing. They just wanted money, my time, my energy, without even acknowledging the sacrifices I'd made. The more I distanced myself, the more they seemed to want. Rachel's health was always the excuse, but I saw through it. She was fine. I knew it, but they still saw me as a provider, a safety net. Nothing more. I should have been used to it by now, but it hurt. It hurt to be expected to drop everything at their command, just because they thought I owed them something. I didn't. I had worked for every penny, every step I had taken. They had never been there when I needed them. Not when I won the science fair. Not when I scored a perfect SAT score. Not when I graduated summa cum laude. They had never been proud of me. The turning point came when I received an unexpected call from Rachel. She was in the hospital again. Another health scare, they told me. My heart clenched, but not with the sympathy I thought I'd feel. No, it was something else. Something darker. Anger, maybe. Anger that after all these years, I was still the one who had to drop everything and rush to her side. The anger started to fester. Something I couldn't easily ignore. "Sarah," she said, her voice shaky. "I need you. Can you come?" I should have said no. I should have told her that I had my own life now. I should have reminded her of all the times I had been there for her, while she never once cared about what I was going through. But I didn't. I said I would come. I grabbed my coat, threw my keys into my purse, and drove to the hospital. I was already halfway there when I realized I was making the same mistake again. I was letting them use me, letting them make me feel guilty for living my life. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, the horn blaring out my frustration. I arrived at the hospital an hour later, my mind a mess of thoughts I couldn't untangle. Rachel was in her usual bed, surrounded by the sterile scent of antiseptic and hospital food. She looked pale, her eyes closed, tubes snaking from her arms. But there was something in the air. Something felt off. My stomach tightened as I stood there in the doorway, watching her in her fragile state. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her health anymore. "Can you stay with me?" Rachel's voice was weak, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at me, her gaze distant, but there was something in it, something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Please, Sarah, just stay for a while. I need you." I sat down next to her, forcing a smile, but inside I was numb. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this, something Rachel wasn't telling me, something that was going to change everything. I had spent years giving, sacrificing for her, for my parents. But I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't keep being the person they expected me to be. "Why did you really call me?" I asked, my voice low. Rachel hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "I needed you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But there's more. You're going to be so angry when you find out." My heart dropped. I knew it. Something was wrong. I didn't say anything. I just waited. And then she told me the truth that had been buried for years. Everything shifted. The ground beneath me cracked, and I realized that the person I had been fighting for all this time wasn't the sister I thought I knew. The family I had been loyal to wasn't the family I had grown up with, and my whole life, my identity, had been built on lies. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I felt dizzy. I had to get out of here. I had to leave. I couldn't stay in this room any longer. "What are you going to do now?" Rachel's voice followed me as I walked toward the door. I turned back, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm done." I could barely get the words out, but they felt like freedom. "I'm done with all of you." And just like that, everything changed. The future I had been building came crashing down. The foundation I had so carefully constructed was crumbling before my eyes. But this time, I wasn't going to run from it. I wasn't going to hide from the truth anymore. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. The next few days were a blur of confusion and clarity. I couldn't quite process what Rachel had revealed. The truth she laid bare was something I had never expected. Not from her, not from my family. It was like being hit by a storm you never saw coming, the winds of betrayal cutting deep. I walked away from the hospital, my mind in overdrive, yet still somehow eerily calm. The world outside felt distant, as though it were happening to someone else. I didn't want to be in this reality anymore, but I had to face it. I had to confront the truth, even if I didn't yet know what I was supposed to do with it. I spent that night pacing my tiny apartment, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't shake the image of Rachel, lying there, her fragile frame surrounded by machines and the false warmth of family love. I had spent years thinking she was the victim, thinking my family was the reason for her suffering. But what if the real cause of her misery was buried in lies? By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. I was going to take back the narrative of my life. I called in sick to work and spent the entire day gathering evidence, documents, photographs, anything that might help me understand the web of deceit that had spun around me. I needed to understand the extent of the lies. I had to break free from their grasp. I had to reclaim my power. I visited the local courthouse, looking for any public records related to my family's finances. I hadn't realized how much I had relied on their support until I started digging through the mess of paper. It was like looking at the skeletons in the closet, but this time they were in plain sight. What I found sickened me. My parents had been siphoning money from my own account for years, justified as family expenses. They had manipulated me, used me as their personal ATM, all while pretending to be the loving family I had longed for. As I sat in the small, dimly lit office, scrolling through the records, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just a victim of neglect. I was a pawn in a much larger game, a game where I had been set up to fail, and I had played along. The thought of confronting them scared me, but I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to break free. My plan was simple. I would expose them, not with violence, not with anger, but with facts. The truth. Cold, hard evidence. That night, I emailed the documents I gathered to myself, making sure I had a backup. The moment was coming, the moment where I would finally stand up to my family. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them pay. It was about finally being free. Free from their expectations, their lies, and the manipulation that had defined my entire existence. The next day, I sat in front of my computer, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. I was about to send an email to the one person I thought I could trust. My mother. I knew she would be furious. I knew she would try to defend herself. But I couldn't back down. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about ending the cycle of lies that had held me captive for so long. I hit send, and then I waited. The response came 2 hours later. It wasn't from my mom. It wasn't even from my dad. It was from Rachel. The email subject line was simple. You don't know everything. And just like that, the game had changed again. I opened the email slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside, Rachel explained things I had never imagined. The truth that had been buried for years was coming to light, and it was darker than I had ever expected. The final words of her email lingered in my mind, like a poison slowly spreading through my veins. You should have never left. You were never meant to escape. I stared at the words, my pulse quickening with every second that passed. You should have never left. You were never meant to escape. It felt like an anchor, dragging me deeper into the sea of confusion and betrayal that had been building for years. What did she mean by that? What had Rachel been hiding from me all this time? I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my coat and rushed out of the apartment, my phone in hand. The cold air hit me as soon as I stepped outside, but I barely felt it. My thoughts were consumed by the email. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I drove straight to Rachel's apartment, not bothering to text or call first. There was a sinking feeling in my stomach, the kind that comes with knowing you're walking into something that could change everything. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw her car, familiar, parked in its usual spot. But Rachel wasn't there. No, she wasn't there. And that was the moment I realized the truth wasn't something she could hide anymore. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood outside her door, my hand hovering over the doorknob, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to expect. I knocked. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. My hand trembled, but I forced myself to turn the knob. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The apartment was empty. No signs of Rachel. But it wasn't the emptiness of the apartment that struck me most. It was a feeling of being watched. I glanced around, my eyes scanning the room. The familiar scent of lavender and vanilla was gone. Instead, there was a strange chill in the air, as if something had been erased. I made my way to the living room, and that's when I saw it. A single envelope, resting on the coffee table. My name was written on it, in Rachel's neat handwriting. With a mix of dread and curiosity, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was short, but its weight was undeniable. Sarah, I didn't want you to know this way, but it's time you knew the truth. Everything you thought you knew about me, about our family, it's all been a lie. What you need to understand is that I wasn't the one who needed saving. You were. I hope you can forgive me one day, but this is the end of our story. You should never have left, but now that you know, you can never come back. Goodbye. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on me. The letter dropped from my hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed onto the couch, trying to make sense of what I had just read. The words felt like they were suffocating me. I had been manipulated, used, and lied to for years. The life I had fought for, the freedom I thought I had gained. It was all meaningless. Rachel hadn't been the victim. She had been the mastermind. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the empty room, my mind racing. When the panic finally started to subside, a different thought began to surface. What if Rachel wasn't the only one responsible for this? What if my parents had known? What if this was all a game to them, and I had been too blind to see it? I had no answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back. I couldn't let myself fall back into the role they had created for me. My family had lied to me, manipulated me, and used me as a pawn in their games for too long. I wasn't going to be their fool anymore. I got up, walking to the door with a new sense of resolve. The truth had broken me, but it also set me free. As I stepped out of Rachel's apartment and into the cold, I didn't look back. I couldn't. There was nothing left for me there. Not anymore. I would face the future on my own, as I always had. And I would rebuild my life, piece by piece, until I was whole again. But little did I know, the worst was still yet to come. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and unexpected twists. The freedom I had longed for was finally mine, but it came with a price. I had stepped away from my family, from the role I had been forced to play for so many years. But now I had no idea what came next. I felt like a ship lost at sea, drifting without a clear destination. I focused on work, on rebuilding my life in the way I had always dreamed. The office had become my sanctuary, a place where I could control the narrative. I buried myself in projects, in the rush of deadlines and the satisfaction of success. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was still missing. The pieces of my past lingered like shadows, always just out of reach. Then one day, out of nowhere, I received an unexpected call. It was from my mother. I didn't recognize the number at first, but her voice, when it came through the line, was unmistakable. She sounded different, almost fragile. She asked me if we could meet. I didn't know what to say. I had no desire to see her, not after everything that had happened. But something in her voice made me hesitate. It wasn't the cold, demanding tone I had become accustomed to. It was a quiet desperation. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure if it was a desperation of guilt or something far darker. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We arranged to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town. The moment I walked through the door, I saw her sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked older than I remembered, her hair graying at the temples, her face drawn. But the worst part wasn't her appearance. It was the way she looked at me, like she didn't know who I was anymore. I sat down across from her, my heart beating erratically in my chest. There was a heaviness in the air between us, something I couldn't quite name. She didn't speak right away, just sat there staring at me. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally broke the silence. "I've made a terrible mistake," she said softly. I didn't know how to respond. This was not the mother I had known, the mother who had manipulated me, used me, treated me as if I were nothing more than a tool for her own convenience. The words hung in the air like smoke, and I found myself wondering if they were just another manipulation. But I couldn't ignore the pain in her eyes. "I've realized something," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything I did for Rachel. For her. I thought I was protecting her. But I see now, I was hurting both of you. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that it was too late, that I was done, that nothing she said would change the years of pain she had caused. But I stayed silent, my hands trembling on the table. I couldn't bring myself to say the words. "I don't know if I can make up for what I've done," she said, "but I want to try. I'm sorry, Sarah. I know that doesn't change anything. But I need you to know that I see what I've done, and I'm so sorry." It was the apology I had been waiting for, but it felt hollow. It felt too little, too late. The weight of all the years of neglect, manipulation, and pain crashed down on me, and I realized something important. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about walking away from a family that had never really been mine. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. Her eyes followed me, a mixture of hope and fear. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and then I said the words that I knew would haunt me forever. "I'm done." The look on her face was indescribable, a mixture of shock, regret, and disbelief. I turned and walked out of that cafe, leaving her behind, leaving everything behind. The world outside felt different, like it had shifted into a new version of itself, one where I was no longer tied to the past. I didn't know what my future would hold. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't someone's pawn. I wasn't someone's disappointment. I was Sarah. And this time, I was living life on my own terms. And that was enough.